Okay, everyone. Well, look, first of all, welcome to the webinar on the evolution and innovation of affordable housing. My name is Louisa Dickins, co-founder of LMRE, the global PropTech recruitment firm, board director of the United Kingdom PropTech Association, and host of the Propcast. So if you're looking to learn more about property technology, bridging the gap between real estate world and technologies, check it out. It's on Apple and Spotify. But enough about me. We're here today to talk about affordable housing and the evolution and innovation that's impacting it. So in the US, affordable housing is housing, rent, or mortgage plus utility payments totaling 30% or less of a household's gross income. Now, households required to pay more are considered cost burden and may have difficulty paying for and affording other necessities such as transportation, food, clothing, medical care. You name it, we all sort of experience it. In the DC metropolitan region, 58% of renters are cost burdened. So that's a huge percentage. And it's not surprising when work hours required to afford any apartment size exceeds 17 hours per week with a minimum wage. Many rent households have trouble finding affordable apartments as well due to the massive shortage, which we're going to hear a lot about later. Now, our audience today, it's a global audience. Those listening are from the US, UK, Europe, and no doubt, we'll all agree that it's a global issue and it varies from country to country and being impacted by so many variables. But the good news is solutions can be found to help manage and solve the issue through different innovations and a focus on community, which we'll be hearing about from the panel later. And now it is time for me to introduce our incredible panel who all have a wealth of knowledge on affordable housing and innovation. Now, given that this webinar is in partnership with Metaprop and we work closely with him to arrange today's event, I would first like to introduce Mr. PropTech, Zander. Not only is Zander a dear friend of mine, but he's also head of strategic partnerships and business development for Metaprop, which is one of the largest PropTech VCs, who are definitely worth checking out if you want to hear more about this space. And we are also joined by the wonderful Brian Johnson. Brian currently serves as Managing Director of Real Estate for CAPC. Now, CAPC is the real estate arm of New Jersey's largest CDFI, New Jersey Community Capital. Since its inception, NJCC has invested $1.6 billion. They've created more than 15,000 jobs and developed over 10,000 housing units, which is, that's pretty mega, isn't it? In addition, Ryan is a co-founder of AAO Property Group, which is an investment and management firm focused on commercial real estate and small business. And now for the community builder, Beatrice Sibbles' introduction. Beatrice is the managing director of BOS Development, which is a real estate development and brokerage firm based in Harlem. With a focus on community development and cultural capital, BOS creates a spectrum of projects necessary for a vibrant community. Now, what is a vibrant community? This includes residential, religion, educational, hospitality, retail, and commercial developments. Now, in Beatrice's leadership of BOS Development, Beatrice brings to bear a track record of financial innovation as a former investment banker and a deep commitment to building community. So thank you for joining us today. And now, last but definitely not least, we're joined by the impressive Professor Andrew Sanderford. Now, Drew studies real estate development and finance, both in commercial and residential real estate. His current work explores questions related to urban spatial structure and its relationship to real estate asset pricing, which he's going to go into in a bit later. He currently teaches in the real estate track at McIntyre and has previously led classes for master's students in real estate development, real estate finance, and housing. Prior to this, he taught at University of Arizona, where he was faculty chair of the real estate development program. So if you look him up, you also find out he's involved in endless research in the field. And now you've met our wonderful panel, we might as well get this webinar started. And also throughout this, if any of the audience listening in, you have some Q&A, please drop a message in. I'll try and bring it in whilst we're all talking. And then at the end, we'll be taking questions as well for our panel. So without further ado, Drew, kick us off. Tell us about what is affordable housing. I gave a very brief introduction, but way more about it. So go for it.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for having us. This is a terrific opportunity to visit with friends and new colleagues and to explore a topic that's near and dear to all of us. So thanks for the opportunity. I think you did a really nice job setting the tone. Affordable housing tends to be this imprecisely defined thing. And as you said, it tends to be an price to income test, right? In the United States, we tend to consider that to be about 30%, where households are paying no more than 30% of their gross income for housing expenses, all inclusive of utilities. In the UK, there's a slightly different price to income test, right? And in the UK, there's a distinction between social housing, affordable housing, and market rate housing, right? So there's this interesting definitional space between the three. In New Zealand, for example, there's even a more relaxed definition, which is housing reasonable relative to one's income and total housing expenses. And so it's this really interestingly imprecise but important space that's inclusive of both public and private efforts to create housing. I think it's also important to note that there's a relatively rare price or profit incentive to create affordable housing, which makes it really important to talk about, right? Because market rate firms don't have a great profit incentive to pursue this, it creates opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and the importance of sustainability. So really an important place to start the conversation, and I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, and you spoke about some market rates. Ryan, perfect time to bring you in. Why has it made it so important globally? Drew touched upon the UK, the US. I presume there's not a general trend, but what market trends are you seeing?
Yeah, hey Lou, and good morning, everybody. I think the trends that we focus on over at New Jersey Capital, Lou, and we're a little more focused just because we're into the community, we're boots on the ground, is really income and wealth inequality, and then the overall question of affordability. And our entire goal is to address these. So just take for instance the income and wealth inequality. Today, African Americans in the U.S., their average income is about 60% of white incomes, and on top of that, African American wealth is 5% of white wealth. And I think we all know historically in the United States, most of the middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from equality they have in their homes. And so that difference between those two ratios is getting compounded consistently. And that's across not just racial backgrounds, but socioeconomic in general, right? Upper and lower to moderate income. And so at CAPC, we're trying to address that. 70% of our home buyers last year were minorities, 60% were first-time home buyers. We have a home buyers assistance program that prepares people that come from our rental portfolio all the way through to get them out of the affordable housing and into their own home. And that home buyers program does financial literacy, all of the above. Really quickly on the affordability side, I think we'll talk about it more with some of the questions as we go through. The real estate market right now is extremely liquid, right? And there's a lot of inventory, there's limited inventory, So prices continue to rise. Incomes are not matching that increase, right? And so it's becoming harder for low and moderate income families to buy or rent without assistance. So on the home buyer side, one of the things that we're really focusing on is down payment assistance and working with the different cities and offering stuff to their workforce. It could be up to $25,000 of down payment assistance. And on the rental side, I know everybody's been watching, at least here in the US, Joe Biden has been giving a lot of money and a lot of the government's been doing a lot with the voucher programs and programs to keep rents affordable in our market rate units. So we're watching both of those trends. But again, they're going to the way where more and more affordable housing is needed.
Yeah, and obviously there's various trends which we need to look at. There's also various markets which we need to look at as well. So whilst they're complex, Drew, bringing you back in here, what are some of the reasons that affordable housing is, so important, such an important part of the overall housing market and economy?
That's it's like the couple $1 trillion question, Lou.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that it's important just to give a little bit of context. So the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis just showed me some interesting things as I was thinking about this. U.S. consumers spent about $2.7 trillion on housing and housing related services in 2020. It's about 10% of U.S. GDP. So this is a space, the housing market in the U.S. is a space of significant economic importance, right? And as Ryan just alluded to, that's not distributed equally, right? And so this is a really important space. I think the other important thing to think about here is that housing provides some basic human needs, right? Warmth, shelter, those kinds of things. It also provides access to spatially related goods and services like jobs, schools. And as Raj Chetty's work at Harvard shown, like where you live, where you grow up, where you go to school, these things all have significant relationships to your future income and future outcomes. And so, yeah, this is a really important space. It's phenomenally. I was going to say it's phenomenally big. It's phenomenally important, but it's also phenomenally micro, right? As Ryan suggests, and Beatrice will attest in a little bit. So it's a critical part of the economy. It's a critical part of how we think about human relationships, human futures. And so innovation and sustainability are a lot of really important dimensions of how we're thinking about the next generation of this. And I'm really excited to hear from Zander and Beatrice and Ryan what they're doing to take this down from 30,000 feet down to the property and the deal level.
Yeah, and this, I guess, Ryan, you're a developer, and maybe the world might be a better place, a more even place, if everyone sort of took a similar approach to you. You know, as a developer, how do you sort of manage this cost without, I guess, affecting the quality? You know, and this is where pricing comes into it as well, which will affect the quality. So what's your approach? You got any tips or how you gone about it?
Pray. No, I'm just kidding, Lou. Honestly, you know, it's been the price increase. Everybody's been documented. You know, for us to bring it a little bit more to the deal level, as Drew said, you know, for us, price of construction for our work in Florida is up 25%. In the tri-state area, it's up 40%. And those are kind of our 1 to 4 family units, which are smaller. On the multifamily side, we have the first project in the country that has opportunity zone funding, historic tax credits, new market tax credits. It's a 98-bed property in downtown Newark. Pricing is up 45% there. Our steel pricing is up 300% individually at that property. So I say that to say every commodity is up. There's a labor shortage, there's material availability, there's a lot going on. And I think this comes back to the genesis of why we put this panel together. The innovation, the technology is needed in order to make affordable housing continue to be able to be developed. We have so much pricing pressure that any efficiency from a labor standpoint or from a cost standpoint or a design standpoint is going to be key in order for the industry to continue to flourish.
Yeah, well, like Zander, this is perfect time to bring Mr. PropTech in. You know, Ryan's just mentioned the word innovation technology. Why is it so important, Zander? And also for our audience today, it'd be great if you give some examples of some technologies, what they do, where it's sort of the context based, I don't know, concrete, you name it. We're here to learn.
Awesome, and of course, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Lou. I think it's important because of all the problems that we've kind of listed each time, and it's kind of one of those critical ideas behind investing in technology is become obsessed with the problem and not solutions. So in each one of those problem sets, we can identify specific ideas and concepts to implement. And the way that we approach this is just from the Metaprop side and kind of our ethos is that we want to make real estate more affordable, accessible, and sustainable. And those first two, accessibility and affordability, potentially they can lead to sustainable because you think about all the efficiencies gained by improving the construction process, the delivery process, and then the management process. So that we break it down across 2 axes. So we think of it as the x-axis as the life cycle of the asset. So from sourcing materials, and this is going to get really into that cement side, the wood side. Beatrice, for your own benefit.
A bit of cement tech.
Yeah, cement tech and wood tech. This is really interesting thing we'll highlight. All the way through to the design process. So instead of each bespoke project being being built and designed through an arduous process, we can just have kind of a standard way of delivering regardless of the site. To the management side of compliance and legal and eradicating a lot of the paper-driven processes, which only create more of a burden and a higher level of cost and more hands touching the actual financing of a home, to some of the programming and education. So rent to own. These are ways of alternatives to financing of actually getting into your home. And then finally on the connectivity side. So really improving the quality and price of, or at least the value of that asset. And the way we're thinking about this, and this is just from the innovation side, is that we're not having to sacrifice inequality for these cost savings. So one example, though, I think on the material side is the rising cost of lumber. And some of our investors and developers have said, if we could just find a way to cut the cost of lumber in half, what would that look like? Key factors behind why lumber is rising is the shutdown at some of the production facilities, coupled with a very interesting factor. And this is where we have to think about the entire ecosystem of the entire economy, is the rise of e-commerce led to a shortage in shipping containers, which were critical for the actual shipment and delivery of lumber. And because of the redistribution of those containers, that led to a glutton supply. So we think about what do we have on hand and how can we increase the quantity of potentially lower quality wood. So there's companies like Woodrow and Invent Wood, which are using polymer base to increase the quality and the longevity of those of that wood material. And now also can be used as an alternative for glass in some cases. So we're talking about see-through wood, which is fascinating to look into. On the other side of that, we think about, okay, now modular and prefab, but prefab at a high quality. So one of our companies, Connect Homes, which creates a standardized pricing on 14 different models, all delivered that you almost act like Legos, just put together, built out, and the home is ready to be lived in. And then you're moving further down the line past the existence or the creation, delivery of the home. Now we talk about all the processes and compliance issues that come with all this. And that's now to companies like Pronto Housing, which is digitizing the leasing and asset management version of getting under the compliance of affordable housing, which I think Beatrice and Drew and Ryan can attest. There's a lot of paperwork behind this. So if we could just find ways to improve the communication, then we've solved at least one battle. So that's how we divide it up. And there's a lot of different categories that we take on, and a lot of different jobs, but that's why we take a really holistic view as it's impactful across the whole life cycle.
Yeah, and you mentioned about, well, we haven't even spoken about COVID yet, but I can imagine that seriously affected supplies of building these houses as well, and the huge delays. I think parts of sort of China are probably one of the few that's actually affected. I think it was in Gen, like they carried on sort of going, but across the US, there was huge amounts of shortages of materials. So if these, I can't remember, do you say lumber, I can't remember the name of the company, can improve that, then that's sort of good news for all. Now, Zander sort of elaborated a little bit more about, the problems and solutions, but Beatrice, finally, we've got to get you in the conversation. What would you say is the end goal of the creation of sort of affordable housing, especially in your experience and from your business? What impact are we having?
So, I'm sitting here in Harlem, as you mentioned, and I know that we have a global panel and global audience today. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about, Zander mentioned compliance. And, Drew talked earlier about different markets think about affordable housing differently, but just to locate a little bit in the US context for people not in our market, is affordable housing in the US market pretty much falls in two categories, which is housing that is built by the public sector and rented to people of low incomes, and where new production is either deferred to the private market through subsidies, low-income housing tax credits, et cetera, the alphabet soup of credits, or people are given subsidies for renting to low-income families, the private properties. And so when we talk about compliance in the US market, it's compliance for largely private developers to provide housing at a subsidized rate. And so I think one of the challenges there is that there's a natural tension, right, between the compliance process being driven around making sure no one games the system, right? To make sure the developer doesn't give the apartment to their cousin, their niece, their best friend, to make sure that there is income qualification. But what that does also, it creates a rigidity in neighborhoods in which you could, if your income goes up too quickly, you could be forced out of your home, right? So from an alignment perspective, right, it doesn't actually, to the point Ryan made earlier, it's a disincentive for communities to evolve over time. And for the age-old American principle, I want my kids to have a better life than I did, right? But, we could be priced out of our community. And so I actually think that one of the areas, to Zander, just give you a little bit of a challenge on one, I don't know how much coffee you had, is we think about, is how can we use technology to rethink about what compliance is, right? To rethink about how can technology give us a snapshot of a community on a big data basis that can really drive into what are the things that we could do to stimulate growth. Can we see if there's any transition in education levels? Can we see if there are any transitions in number of kids in the household? Can we see if there are adequate resources? Do we need childcare? And so that would be my challenge to the tech community, is to kind of put on the lens of community development of players such as particularly like Ryan and myself. I don't know why I do it, but I'm a private developer, to really think about how can the technology not just help the building, but how can the technology build community from even doing compliance?
There's been some coffee, but I will take a page out of your book, and Ryan's in saying that I think a lot of it comes down not on the federal compliance side, but to the partnership with local municipalities and being able to implement that technology to really, because think about the idiosyncratic nature of real estate being so hyper localized, regardless of there's potential for, everything has, general trends of a given region. But if you think about just in Harlem or in Philadelphia, and if you were to partner with the local government and then private developers to really garner that information, that data, and not look at it each in a silo, but the whole view, that's where you can get some really interesting ideas behind, or at least learnings of how we can improve the given neighborhood. And right now we're just on the cusp of implementing technology for single family and affordable housing. So say I'd harken back about just before COVID, when we were asked over and over again, is there any off-the-shelf technologies which we could use for these types of projects? And it was not easy. I'll be very honest, not easy to find, because so much of the technology was designed for, say, like Class A office or right. Class A family in downtown urban centers. So it was a lot of us just kind of repositioning technology that didn't have a lot of the right data points, just right down to the fields weren't built out that were important. But that's changing quickly. And it's this is where we're on a constant search, but we're looking for that interconnection between the physical asset, the IoT measuring the use of the space, the amount of people living in a given area, partnering with their education system, improving the connectivity so that they actually are connected to a digital source of learning, and then everything into the actual building construction process. So that's how we're trying to create all of that working together, but it is going to be super localized. So that's why we look to partner with folks like yourself.
Got it.
I guess we spoke about compliance, we spoke about sort of technology as well. We haven't spoken about the big variable, the wage gap, what effect it's having on affordable housing. And Ryan and Beatrice, I know you both have strong opinions, and you can talk about this matter. So Ryan, why don't you go for it?
Lou, in terms of the wage gap, it kind of goes back to everything that Beatrice just said, right? It's got to be a holistic approach to affordable housing. The end goal for us is to move people through the affordable housing, whether it's generationally to home ownership or equity, right? And so when you talk about the wage gap, I'll take our ground up construction fund we have down in Florida, where we're building. Now we're seeing increases of cost. We're seeing a lot of liquidity in the market. And so our sales price of where we need to be in terms of building has jumped at least 50,000 on the homes. So in a normal market, what you could do is literally just take your price and increase it by 50,000 to make that up, right? It's easy. The Florida market will support it. But because we're serving low to moderate income families in that 80 to 120% AMI band right now. They're not able to effectuate that increase because of the wages, right? So it goes back to exactly what you said, kind of the workforce development, the education, the community programming is what's really important for those tenants. Getting people involved in tech and STEM technologies. What we did in Orlando, there's a neighborhood called the Paramore District, historically African-American and very challenged. What we're doing now, we did a full rehab of existing units, and now we're connecting the seniors and the existing tenants with all the different service providers in the area to provide them with options, not only for housing assistance, but financial literacy, and again, workforce development to get them working. So that wage gap and affordability, Drew talked about it, Beatrice talked about it, that middle class shrinking has really been challenging for us as well too. I'll kick it to Beatrice.
Let me get off mute. The challenge that we have in, as a real estate developer in different real estate markets operate from a development perspective with different kinds of development rights. So in the New York City market, there is a, almost 100-year-old, well, it's very old zoning code that prescribes what you can build in different neighborhoods. And for each, so it's a zoning code that says you can build residential here, you can build commercial there. And then it says what density of residential can you build? So you can build up to 10 stories, or you can build only up to 2 stories. You can build single family, you can build high rise. One of the challenges that we have in the zoning code is for a community like Harlem, the commercial corridor, Harlem extends largely, depending how you define it. For those who know New York, north of 110th Street, up to 155th, which you then probably call Washington Heights. So it's a pretty big neighborhood of 700,000 plus people. I think what's that, the size of Atlanta. And in this entire neighborhood, there's really only one commercial corridor. And that commercial corridor is river to river 125th Street. And the corridor goes from 124th Street to 126th Street. Now, those commercial sites are prioritized for big box retail. Small businesses cannot afford to be on those corridors. It's where your Whole Foods, your H&Ms, your Sephoras are located. So what does that mean for a community when effectively you have economic segregation, right? Where all the economic opportunity used to be in Midtown, right? And so if you're in Harlem, people talk a lot about food deserts, but there's certain areas of Harlem that are job deserts. And we have the strange phenomenon where the public housing in Harlem, a lot of the affordable housing is public housing. And then specifically, in New York, it's the New York City Housing Authority. And then specifically, this public housing by zoning does not allow commercial development. So if you grow up in a neighborhood where the only jobs that you see are people flipping burgers and bagging groceries, what does that say about your economic potential? And what cycle does that create of trajectories in jobs and trajectories in career? Like, why would you study physics in class just to go flip burgers, right? That's where you're going to end up. So why do I have to learn this physics? What is the STEM thing? And so I think it really is a holistic, the way that we are going to address affordability is a tactical approach, right? Yes, it's all the point that Zander's making about the cost structure. It's all the issues about delivery structure. It's all the issues about finance structure. And then on top of that, welcome to urban planning, zoning, right? Land is a fixed commodity, but the way that you zone that land triggers that economic opportunity. And so one of the things, for example, when people realize that Harlem and other neighborhoods like Harlem were food deserts where we didn't have enough supermarkets. I've lived in Harlem for 20 years, and I've seen the difference that having supermarkets has made to the community. Is they put a zoning benefit for fresh food. So you would get up to be able to build an additional 20,000 square feet if you put a supermarket featuring fresh food on your ground floor. You get up to 20,000 feet extra and up to 1 story taller. Well, maybe it's time for us to think about incentives in the zoning code that increase the ability to earn higher incomes for our households. So is it childcare on site? Is it a technology lab on site? Is it a training center on site? Is it a satellite of a community college on site? And then, not have to have the developer come out of pocket by not being able to develop residential, but basically give a bonus for activity on site or in, within X number of miles that provides income and career pathways of improvement for residents. And then you run up against the whole compliance issue, right? Because, yeah, but if we go with a by the book compliance technology and you start raising your wage, then you get thrown out of the building, right? Because you no longer qualify. And so I think that we are at a point in time where there is growing consensus on the importance of affordability, the importance of community building. And I think we just need to put on some thinking caps and think about innovation, not just on the technology perspective, but also on the whole community building infrastructure.
With that sort of in mind, what I guess speaking from your personal experience and development as well, what specific community impact have you seen, or what processes have you gone through?
So part of my business is building facilities for charter schools to have not just high quality education options, but high quality infrastructure for that education, because the physical environment does affect how we perform. The other business that I'm doing is a business called Village Harlem that is looking to celebrate and tap the creative talent in communities like Harlem through creative, but not just as a form of entertainment, but as a form of business creation, right? The business of culture is a very profitable business, right? The merging of marketing and the creative music media industry is really strong, right? So everyone thinks about a Jay-Z and a Beyonce, but they're much smaller versions of that, right? You could be a makeup artist putting on Beyonce's makeup, making $2,500 a day rate, right? So creating those opportunities in communities like Harlem, where that's a natural interest, is significant, right? If you've got a 20-year-old making $2,500 a day, that's a very big transition. But where's the training for that? The cosmetology schools, et cetera. And so, yes, I think it's a multi-layered conversation, but the opportunity is very large.
Yeah, and I guess we've spoken about specific places. We've spoken about Harlem. We spoke about certain areas, whether it's sort of New York. When we all caught up separately, we spoke about macro, we spoke about micro. Looking at the sort of bigger picture, every city's sort of different. Does there need to be more sort of wider research at a more sort of just a wider sort of macro level? I don't know who wants to sort of chip in on this one, but surely we've got to look at the bigger picture here.
I would say Drew.
Sure, tag the academic in. Sure, great. Lou, ask your question again. I think it's important to restate.
Basically, are we looking at, we need to look at micro and macro. Let's touch upon sort of the macro level. What needs to be done here?
Yeah, and so just a couple of things. There are a number of institutions that are doing really, really impressive and important work that scales nationally in the U.S. And there are analogs in other countries. So just to give a shout out to two very talented bunches, the Turner Center at UC Berkeley and the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. Just to touch on some interesting, some data, the Joint Center did some work over there. They've been focusing on rental property for the last several years. And they found recently that 19.2 million, or 62% of the working age households in the United States are housing cost burdened, right? However, an interesting sort of additional data point is that most of the growth in rental tenure in the United States has been from high income households, right? So we've got interesting pressure in the sort of macro rental market in the United States coming from higher income households moving to economic opportunity, right? And so we've got a really interesting macro dynamic going on where we've got lots of rental housing cost burdened households, but we've also got a lot of unburdened households moving and creating interesting frictions in the market for other people. So it complicates the macro market for both Beatrice and Ryan, trying to figure out, how do I acquire land? How do I deal with unique public policies at the micro level? So fascinating when we think about this at the macro scale, because it does filter down almost immediately in a lot of cases to the micro. So yes, answer is we have to study both, and if we don't, we're in deep.
Yeah, and I also think every community is completely different. You can't just sort of pigeonhole everyone and it's exactly the same people, the same wages, the same like cultures or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. Very well said.
We touched upon COVID very briefly earlier with Zander, but surely, everyone's, I'm doing this from home right now. We're all spending more time at home. We're getting back to the office. We're not going to talk about get back to the office because there's enough webinars on that. But surely COVID's affected affordable housing, is price points obviously changing, more people are they looking to maybe spend more? I don't know. But Drew, you can probably talk a bit more about the price points, and Ryan, like, what have you seen in terms of COVID affecting it? Maybe Ryan go first.
Sure. I can go first. Just in terms of affordable housing, I guess for our portfolio, so we have 600 rental units in addition to the 200 for sale units we kind of do every year. Our rental portfolio, we had a lot of challenges, obviously, with tenants paying, right? Because a lot of the people weren't as fortunate as us in terms of being able to work from home, so they're doing retail, they're doing jobs where they're seeing a little bit of cuts. But to be honest, there was the other side of it where a lot of people were working. So you had some tenants that were really in trouble and some that were taking advantage of it. But, our property management team was all over it. We were able actually to secure over $350,000 in rental assistance from the government, different municipalities and grant programs to kind of service a lot of that back rent payment. And there's still a couple programs coming. So there were some opportunities to kind of supplement that. But now things are starting to open up a little bit more. So we are seeing a lot of the tenants that are now starting to pay again. The eviction moratorium is something we haven't talked about. The foreclosure eviction moratorium is, the floodgates could open in August when things are open. And it still kind of remains to be seen how that's handled from a government level. There's going to be a lot of people. There could be homeless issues if families are really put out on the street with nowhere to go. So that's kind of how we've been handling it for the most part. I think, to Drew's point, just to touch on it from a macro level, when he says, how do we acquire these properties? Acquisitions for us, because a lot of our stuff comes from distressed assets where we try to keep people in them. We haven't been able to buy anything on the open market. We've been working directly with cities. We've been doing alternative structures like tax lien purchases, working with hospitals, other nonprofits that have land to develop. So to Drew's point, it's been extremely difficult through COVID for us to really buy anything in the open market.
Drew, do you want to talk about anything to pricing points? And I guess actually also before, this is kind of what Zander should probably wants to talk about, and bringing it back to the technology. Like we work with a number of clients that actually work within the, I guess they call them like delinquent payers, and businesses like Till who help sort of manage that. And whether it's obviously because of COVID, people being sort of out of work through a pandemic, which no one could predict, but also I know they're looking at like different products where, like, I guess certain jobs like school teachers, they earn like less at certain times, and some jobs don't get paid as much, it's seasonal and everything like that. So there are some property technology companies which are addressing these factors, which also come into affordable housing. Zander, you might know a little bit more about this. I'm talking it from my sort of understanding, but feel free to tune in if you wanna.
We are using Till. I'll just say that we are using Till. Xander did
big up
connect us with them.
Till.
But go ahead, Xander.
Thank you, Ryan, for the tee up, and Lou. Yeah, so Till, that helps with rent abatement, basically. So if you need to, you can't pay the first of the month, but you can pay over the succession of that month as you get paid. Then it acts as like a tech-enabled renters bank, which the hope and the goal is that we avoid any of the repercussions from the eviction moratorium. Which is oncoming. So we're trying to build wealth as we get to that period. And companies like Till are hyper focused on that, which is something that we really, really appreciate. And then what you were describing on providing financing specifically for, say, like essential workers that need it, and that's called like Landed. So like landed.com will provide financing for those workers. And then there's also companies like Dream America, which if you were to qualify for the home purchase of, or qualify based on the program for buying your own home as you move out of an urban center, which is a big trend that's happening, they'll buy it and then you rent it from them, supplementing your down payment. And then you rent it over time to the point at which you can afford and for the financing for, say, a mortgage on that house. But there's a few companies that are doing that, like Landis is doing that. Quo Home, Propertunity, Homeward. There is a surge in alternative financing, which it's almost like rent to own, but it's also coupled with education as you start to look at all of your different options. So I think it's really important to have the optionality of, am I renting or do I actually like this place? But now I only had to put, say, like 10,000 down or 15,000 down. Like companies like Up and Up, which you can hop around to the different versions on their platform, and you can choose to either buy into the Up and Up house that you're living in, or you can go and rent another one in a different region. That's the kind of flexibility. So flexibility of rent versus just buying into like a 30-year fixed rate. Granted, rates are down, but we're also trying to find new ways of supplementing their down payments, or even companies like Zero Down, no down payment. Just a small portion of an equity financing. So that's, they buy into the value of your home and you don't have to put any money down. These are very unique structures, and they are partnering with some of the more institutional traditional lenders to accomplish these financial products, which then leads to, and this is getting more into the macro level, but the institutionalization of single family housing, build, rental. It's a double-edged sword. So some are seeing it as creating a price compression because it's increasing the value of these homes, and therefore the appraised value will just price people out of actually being able to purchase this. However, the efficiencies gained by units of scale by using one of these, so like call them like the Pretiums of the world, Ares getting involved, Blackstone, they can now invest at large scales across so many units and benefit from having to be able to invest in affordable housing as part of their strategy, taking advantage of the government subsidies for those programs, but being able to deliver that type of product without having the massive overhead. So it can be this is a trend in the last year as institutional ownership of single family went from 2% all the way to 12%. And that's historically has not happened. But that level of investment can potentially, and hopefully this is where the unfortunate optimist of a venture capitalist comes in. Hopefully it really leads to a new supply and a new quality of investment in the house that we're describing on this session.
God, it's a very good pitch.
Hey, Luke, can I ask Zander a couple questions, because he touched on a lot.
100%, fire away.
I guess, Zander, the question for me, I think the institutional guys get into the SFR space, from our standpoint as a nonprofit, it makes it very difficult for us, right? It drives pricing. It's really interesting. I think our fund that we came out with was specifically for urban infill in those markets where those guys kind of don't compete, because I think they're more on the outskirts or cities that are on the upper trend. But on the lease to own stuff and alternative financing, that's extremely interesting to me. But are those guys, what's the bracket? Is it low to moderate income they're focusing on? Or are they more kind of upper income? What type of neighborhoods are they doing those programs in? Because, we do have lease to own, but I think to your point, if there's some education and technical assistance there, it could be really useful. But I'm just wondering, are they focusing on that same affordable target market? Or are they kind of taking their models and migrating it to address it now?
So they're really, the majority that I've seen thus far are focused on that moderate income. Some touching down into low income, like Dream America, more on the low income side. But like say putting the Landis, they're more on the moderate side. But you break it down into two sides. So when you have like the Breezefulls and the Simplest, which make it really easy to scan and be pointed in the right direction of a mortgage that fits you. Or a financing option that fits you and your income and your long-term strategy, which historically is like you go to a bank, you fill out papers, and it's like, it's a long, arduous process. So if you had, say, the same quality of service as like calling into like a customer service option that had like a Zendesk, and the quality, the response rate, and the less friction of filling out forms was really easy. You just type in, fill out your information, like using like a Morty or a better.com. But these ones, those are more on the upper end, but something a little bit simpler, just a simple, clean user interface that can make a massive difference in just the approach of one, filling out and finding the right financing solution. And then on the other side, as you get further down the line of, okay, rent to own, I can only put in X amount of cash right now, or I can pay over time to buy into my down payment. What does that look like? That is also, I consider that as education, because you think of the different options of partnering with these companies to then get into your dream home. That's where I like to pair those two. But it still comes with a lot of partnership from the traditional lenders to accomplish these products, because they are quite expensive for now. But there's no shortage to say. We're tracking over 30 companies that are almost like directly dedicated to that rent to home and education model.
So Zander, you made news today for me I was not aware of, of the level of innovation in this space. So thank you. So what I think is really interesting is oftentimes financial innovation is to the detriment often of communities of color, right? We have the 2008 debacle with predatory lending. It would be really interesting to see if we could get ahead of this and kind of talk to, community influencers, leading organizations to see, almost like the way that you talk about the COVID vaccine, right? Really personalize it and say, this is a benefit, right? Forget, the past is the past. Let's try to understand how we can leverage it to see how, in particular, communities of color could it take advantage of infrastructure like lease to own to become owners in communities and address this home ownership gap. Ryan, I'd be really happy to kind of also brainstorm that with you to how can we get ahead of this? So, yes, it's if you're hearing that the single family penetration of institutions is going up to 12%, if we start to think about it when the penetration is up to 20%, then that'll be the price impact is probably going to make a lot of these desirable communities unaffordable. So how can we get ahead of it?
Yeah, and I think that also comes down to those institutions are going to want to partner with local operators, and then that local operators will lead to us, being focused on that municipality or that given neighborhood in a city,
right?
Because that's just like how the personal nature of real estate. But I think the right now a lot of those programs, because I'm highlighting them now, but they don't have they are working on building out the channels to reach their given audience. So they're partnering with brokers and developers at the local level just to showcase that this is an option for anyone that is on the search. Because right now, perhaps people are just using Google search and trying to find what is the mortgage that fits me. So these products are just coming online in the last couple of years. They're just gaining enough traction and revenue and users. But it does come down to kind of the mass acceptance of the market to utilize them. So we still need to partner, and this is always going to partner with industry in order to get the engagement levels to sustain these products.
Yeah, well, also if I can sort of step in here as well, thinking, because obviously I'm understanding there's so many different areas of real estate innovation happening, and there's I guess social impact technology also comes into it as well. And there's some businesses like Built ID, I don't know if in the US yet, they're doing very well in the UK, but they basically focus on making places more sustainable and connecting diverse groups of people, products, and accelerating like basically trust between whether it's the government, communities, and the decision makers. And if you see a product like that, like doing that, and they connect up with a different sort of product, I don't know whether it's delinquent rent, I don't know. So many of these property technology companies are now sort of merging and just becoming like an extended part of their business. And I think we've already seen so much change and acceleration and development of this space in the last 2 years. I think it could really have like a huge part to play in I guess things to do with affordable housing and so many other aspects which touch upon sort of real estate. But it'll be interesting to see. A hell of a lot needs to be done. And the more I listen to you guys talk, I feel like that good things are happening, but we've got to work slightly harder. And educate.
One brief observation is that I think Beatrice alluded to this, is that we've got two levels of the problem that you're grappling with. One is initial affordability, and then the second is the durability of affordability, right? And that becomes it's an interesting space to navigate, right? That's where some of Zander's examples were really quite powerful. But the question is, do they eliminate the durability of that housing unit's affordability over time? The answer is maybe. And the question is that a trade-off we're interested in making? That's a really big societal question that we're all going to need to grapple with as we move forward with stuff.
Yeah. And Drew, if I could just jump in on that. We can, it depends also how we look at that, right? So if while you're in affordable housing and you're paying your rent on time, that builds your credit score, right? Because now we have credit score technology that looks at how you pay your bills. Then we link that up to, you're making news to me, Zander's lease to own opportunities. And so we monitor as people's incomes are going up and counsel ways for them to transition to ownership, right? Which is, so yes, that's where compliance comes in, right? Compliance has this punitive thing, but compliance could also be about advancement, right? You should only be in this 80% AMI thing for 5 years, because after 5 years, you should get at 130% of AMI. How do we get you there? And free up that unit for someone else to come to the starting track.
I think that's very well said. How do you increase the speed of the filtering process in econ terms? Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way to think about
it. And Beatrice, I just want to take your thought a step further with the kind of the tracking of the rent and then connecting them with these lenders. I think traditional lenders, and Zander, I think you said they're going to some of the traditional groups. They don't really serve the affordable housing market, right? Because there could be credit issues. The home buyer program and the education we do, that's the step. But we found that it's so difficult to get these banks out of their box in order to be flexible enough to lend. If you can take some of this information you're getting from a fintech standpoint, and then now you create almost a lender that creates long-term products that lends to people differently, that's the innovation we need in the industry, right? We don't need the same traditional lenders, because they're not the ones they're not doing it. Regardless of what they say, that box is very hard for people that go from rent to own in the affordable bracket or low to moderate income bracket to fit into. Absolutely. So I challenge the tech people to say, hey, new partners, and do things completely differently, because a lot of the things we've been doing have not been really serving the market we need.
We also have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm nervous about time. We've got a couple more questions, which I'm really eager to hear from Drew and Zander on. But this is one which has just come in. For the price-controlled housing and special circumstance mortgages, when the owner wishes to sell, are there profit restrictions on the sale to keep it in the affordable sector or not?
I can answer that one for us. So for some of our product, yes, there are deed restrictions. It depends on the subsidies that go into the actual construction and acquisition of the property. But our goal is we're doing something right now in Atlantic City where we're hoping to do 200 units over the next 3 years. And we're getting state subsidy. And what we said to the state is, when we sell it, we'll keep it deed restricted, but we kind of want to set it up where the next person can have that generational wealth and they're free to sell it to the open market. But yes, there are some deed restrictions attached to subsidy for me. Beatrice, you might have a different experience.
Yeah, it's the, as they say, the $1 million question. You know, we have limited equity co-ops here where there are restrictions on, if you resell it, you basically have to pay back to the housing agencies a percentage of the appreciation. And I think that we just have to think about that tension between preserving affordability and wealth creation. It's not an easy question.
It's a thin line for sure.
And hopefully that answered your question. Like, obviously all of us are free to answer any questions as well directly. Our final two questions, we've spoken about lots of things which we can do, whether it's institutions, non-for-profits, you know, technology companies, but, you know, surely a lot of this comes down to education. And Drew, you know, this is your time. What can really sort of be done?
Oh, lots of things. But from my chair at a university, I think about it this way. I think of this particular webinar or a webinar like this as being exactly what we want students to graduate and be able to participate in, right? This topic of housing innovation and sustainability is, you know, it's the intersection of economics and finance and public policy and public administration and construction and engineering and all these kinds of interesting disciplines. And so we study this stuff and we engage it in curricula so that people with different flavors of expertise, different interests, different backgrounds can contribute to solving this really interesting and important societal problem and issue, right? You know, the university is a terrific place, right? You get a chance to come and debate and find the truth, even if it's gritty and it hurts a little bit. Sometimes it hurts a lot, but it's a way for us to contribute and to create an ongoing conversation about where are the opportunities, right? Beatrice was just talking about information asymmetry. How do we identify information asymmetry so that we can create information? And as Ryan says, we can channel that into a different lending product, right? So my job is to create and be a steward of the conversation and allow these different attributes and disciplines to come together, engage, and essentially amplify one another to create solutions. And so I don't know exactly what the solutions look like. I mean, I'll leave that crystal ball reading to Zander. And so I think that's probably where I'll hand it off. But I think we create the framework where all this debate can occur, not all of it, but some of the debate can occur, and welcome in the multiplicity of perspectives so that we can have conversations between finance, technology, public policy, zoning, all at one time to create a holistic and synergistic set of solutions.
Yeah, and now
I think that's you.
Yeah, Zander, over to you. You're, God knows when you graduated, not too long ago, I don't think, such a fresh face. Tell us about academic young professional development. Why should people learn about space? How did you get into the space? Where's the interest come from, and how can we keep it going?
Yeah, and it's relatively fresh, but thank you, Lou. And I think just echoing from Drew, the multidisciplinary side of real estate is what's so fascinating, both about the problems and then the solutions, and then the individuals that can come into the space, because we see that you can really draw from all sides of life, from finance, from public policy to engineering and materials science. Really, there is no shortage of potential areas to solve for, which makes this a very exciting question. And just for my own sake, I mean, that was what was most fascinating about joining the real estate and real estate technology side, is that, well, one, it's the most engaged, it's the asset that I live and breathe and do everything in, and that's real estate. It's tangible, it's there. We all are experiencing it, whether you think about it every single day, whether you're walking down the street, going to your favorite store, or just waking up in a home. That's kind of what shapes your environment. That's why we chose to build and exist in real estate structures. That's what, like, from a philosophical standpoint, that's where I stand. And then from, just a curiosity standpoint of what is happening on the technology side, and why is there such a laggard of embracing that in real estate, which is just, only really transformed, let's call it, the last 10 years of truly engaging in open innovation versus just building out core systems in the last 25 years of just where Where's my property located? Who's paying rent? We got those down, great. Now, let's think about everything else in the process which can be improved. And that's where we're so early innings, to use the baseball analogy, of how much can be done. And as we've described today, almost every facet, from financing, from site selection, build out, and then the sustainable process of making sure that people can, the durability of staying in this affordable house. Or are we talking about the move out process? So reducing the cost of actually moving to your next home, your dream home, and how do we accomplish that? And that's partnerships with some of the major lenders, some of the major companies like Lowe's, Home Depot, all major logos that are also taking a look at everything that they've been doing. It's not just our core business, but it's all a real estate problem and then a social problem. So that's the very macro view and philosophical approach, but that's pretty much open door. And then if anyone has any ideas for solving the problems that we've listed today and some passion, please call any one of us. We would love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zander. It's so refreshing to hear someone who's so passionate about what they do and so also well informed. Unfortunately, everyone, we've come to the end of the webinar. Really hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please, give us a 5-star review. I think we enjoyed it. Also, I'd like to give a special thanks to obviously the Metropop team, the LMRE, can't even say my own company name, LMRE team, especially great arranging the event, and obviously Unisu for hosting it. Thank you to the panel. You gave some incredible insights and some great takeaways. And I think we all have a lot more things we need to sort of consider as well. If you have any questions for us, please shoot us an email directly. We can share everyone's contact details, or LinkedIn is a fabulous way to get in touch. But otherwise, thank you to the audience for joining us. And I will hopefully catch up with you all later. But thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Lou.
Bye.
Thank you.